Okay, we're going to begin our presentation. I'd like to welcome all of you to the ISO 9001-2015 Critical Points of Review During the Transition Audit Process webinar. My name is Joseph Krolikowski, and I am the Technical Director for Perry Johnson Registrars. Couple of quick notes. Everyone is on mute, but I do invite you to use the question portion of the dashboard. I will absolutely take your questions at the conclusion of the presentation, and will attempt to provide as much additional information as possible. A couple of topics that we'll be covering today, an overview here. First, we'll discuss how this transition is going to be handled. We will review the projected amount of additional time that's going to be needed. We've got a deep dive into the anticipated new audit content. I'm going to provide a summary on how an audit of ISO 9001-2015 will differ from ISO 9001-2008, as well as how it will be similar. Some concluding remarks, and then we will absolutely take your questions, and as many of them as you have. So let's begin with a review of the transition process and how we are going to handle it. We are going to be offering three approaches to the transition audit, and any one of these three will get you certified to the new standard. The preferred approach is to do it as part of your recertification audit. It's preferred because the recertification audit already includes additional audit time, and obviously it already includes the issuance of a certificate. You can, however, transition as part of a surveillance audit. Now, if you choose to do it as part of your regularly scheduled annual surveillance audit, it will result in a small amount of additional audit time for most clients. This will vary from case to case. As a last option, if you happen to be on semi-annual surveillance audits, we are going to permit a transition as part of 2 consecutive semi-annual surveillance audits. However, the preferred approach, the preferred process, is that the full transition is done in a single step. So if you are on semi-annual audits, we can do the full transition in a single semi-annual audit step. In both scenarios 2 and 3, we will issue a revision to your certificate, a revision to the existing 9001-2008 certificate that you have. That would then bear an R1 on the certificate number. In terms of the projected amount of additional audit time, we prepared an internal grid to help us calculate the amount of time that was going to be needed. Obviously, the full amount of detail therein is considered confidential, but we can confirm a couple of key points of information. Most average-sized companies are going to be looking at a half day of additional audit time to complete their transition. Now, mind you, this is if it's done as part of a surveillance audit. Now, there are going to be some companies that will be able to complete their transition with no additional audit time at all. That's going to obviously need to be taken on a case-by-case basis. But again, the key number here is that if you plan to do it as part of a surveillance audit, the likely number, depending on your company, is a half day of additional audit time. Now, in terms of what we're going to be looking at that's new and what is going to specifically require verification during the transition audit, we've prepared a list of what has been identified as the new content, and we're going to be going over these items, and we're also going to give you some sense of the approach that's going to be taken to audit these items. So we'll begin in Section 4. And the standard asks, has the organization implemented a process to determine, monitor, and review external and internal issues relevant to its purpose and strategic direction. Now, obviously, this is a very high-level item. We feel that there's going to be a couple of approaches brought to bear in our review of this. Most certainly, it will include an interview with the management, with the leadership team. It will very likely also include some review of your planning, your strategic planning, to ensure that you are effectively identifying external and internal issues. Clause 4.2 directs auditors to inquire, has the organization determined who its interested parties are? We've been covering interested parties in some of our other webinars. You will no doubt remember that they include both persons close to the company, customers, employees, and that's also defined as folks external to the company. Gets into things like suppliers and unions and so forth. The amount of audit time for this topic is likely going to be minimal. We are anticipating that this is going to be a combination of legacy documentation, things like your quality manual, should you choose to retain it. Again, interviews with top management, discussions with management on who are the interested parties. As a furtherance to the interested party item, the standard is also now asking, have we established a process to monitor and review information about who the interested parties are and what their requirements are? And again, we'll be using existing methods for this. Any good company is going to have a process for determining customer requirements, a contractual process. Companies that are responsible for the design of their products, the 9001-2008 standard already has an extensive list of input requirements. Those methodologies will be brought to bear in the new audit to 2015 to answer this question. Who are the interested parties, and what are you doing to stay abreast of their requirements? Now, I want to emphasize that 4.2 also provides an important clarification on interested parties, and this has been emphasized in past webinars. It specifically says determined by the organization to be relevant, and that's crucial here. This is your organization, and it is absolutely on you to state what's relevant and what isn't. Now, obviously, we have to examine that as auditors and see what basis of thinking you're using for drawing that conclusion, but that's where the standard points to, is that the organization determines relevancy as it pertains to interested parties. Clause 4.3 has a kind of interesting statement in that exclusion can now be sought from any requirement of the standard, not just those from product realization. Now, I'm using the older terminology from 9001-2008 to illustrate a point here. In the past, of course, under 9001-2008, you could only seek exclusion from Section 7 or portions of Section 7. In the new standard, in 9001-2015, the approach that is mentioned is to claim an item as non-applicable or not applicable and to document it. And it has opened up the entire standard to such claims. Now, obviously, we have to examine the validity of those items, and they have to be documented. So in terms of the methods that we will use to audit this requirement, they'll be exactly the same. The only difference is that these items may now not necessarily have to be captured in a document called Quality Manual, but the audit approach itself will be the same. Transitioning now to Section 5, has management demonstrated that it has taken accountability of the effectiveness of the quality management system? And this is kind of an interesting concept here, and I do believe that this is very much what has been intended for some time. And that is that management is involved, and management is making itself accountable. So how are we going to review this? How are we going to look for this? Well, a few things that seem obvious. Is management a participant in management review? Is management a participant in corrective action, in customer complaint resolution? Some of these fundamental activities, do we see that the leadership team is a participant? And that's what we're projecting is going to be the likely method for auditing compliance to this clause. Has management assured that the quality policy and objectives are compatible with the strategic direction of the company? The whole aspect of strategic direction has raised some concerns, and it has certainly made some folks concerned about, are we going to be digging into the financial records and so forth? The short answer is no. We will not be digging into your accounting books. What we are going to be doing is saying, okay, what are you doing to ensure that the financial and strategic directions of the company are consistent with your quality policy and objectives? Now, there's a lot of ways that that could manifest. We could see that in management review minutes. We could see that in business plan minutes. We could see that in operational memorandums. We could see that in email traffic. There's a lot of ways that you can show that the strategic direction and the quality of direction of the company are on shared paths. A lot of ways that that could be accomplished. I would project that our auditors are going to be extremely open-minded about this particular topic. How has management assured that the quality management system requirements have been integrated into the business processes? Now, again, here we're not digging into accounting practices and so forth. However, there are a couple of areas where quality system requirements make sense being applied to business processes. A couple of examples. Record retention, right? These records need to be retrievable. Do you have a process for cataloging the business process records? Revision control on documents, making sure that the invoice document is at the most current revision and so forth. Perhaps the most obvious, competency records. Are the personnel that have the most direct relationship to business processes, are they competent to do so? It's possible that there's going to be some additional manifestations of that requirement, but those are the ones that we're projecting are going to be the most important and the most obvious to fulfill this clause. Has the organization ensured that the quality policy is available to all relevant interested parties? And again, let's bear in mind what they mean by that term, interested parties. That means both people that are insiders to the company and folks that are relevant outsiders to the company. And we've examined this, and in general, when a company puts up their quality policy, say in the lobby, or on a website, that constitutes making it available to relevant interested parties. So many of you, I suspect, are already in the habit of making your quality policy available to folks that are considered relevant. Those practices will continue. It's just now that we're going to be specifically looking to see that that's been done. Has top management taken on the responsibility for the management of the system? Now, this was formerly the purview of the management representative, and this kind of furthers what we were talking about earlier, the whole idea that is top management involved? Is top management doing the business of the system? Are they leading the activities of the system? Now, one other thing that we'll again mention here, and this has been discussed in past webinars, this requirement does not imply that you can't appoint a key contact. It does not imply that at all. What it means is that leadership has to lead. Leadership has to manage this system and take responsibility for it. So this is just one additional clause that kind of hits that point home. Has top management established a means to ensure that processes are delivering their intended outputs? Now this requirement, we feel, is going to be met by the current requirement of KPIs and objectives. KPIs, I'm sure you're aware, stands for Key Performance or Key Process Indicators. We already have an extensive section in our audit report where we review these items. We feel that that's going to be a key factor in fulfilling this revised requirement, as well as management's participation in the review of those items and in the corrective action process at large. Turning our attention then to Section 6, has a process been developed to determine applicable risks? Now we've dug into this several times in the past on other webinars. It's even written into the annex of the ISO 9001 standard. A formal process for risk management is not required. However, we do expect you to have an understanding of this requirement and be prepared to explain what you've done within your system to address the requirement. Now obviously there's a lot of possibilities for addressing this requirement: management review, preventive action, planning meetings, and so forth. We've actually got another slide devoted to this towards the end of the presentation. And then that clause, of course, continues in 612 where it says, has a process been developed to address identified risks, including evaluation of effectiveness? And again, same thing. I would only add to this that a review of the metrics will also very likely factor into our assessment of this process. Are quality objectives relevant to the conformity of products, and do they enhance customer satisfaction? Kind of an interesting idea here. I would project that for most companies, most organizations, the quality objectives are relevant to product conformity and customer satisfaction by default. Those are ideals that we strive for, and it seems difficult to conceive of objectives that would be rendered that didn't accomplish this. But nevertheless, the requirement is now explicit, and our current assessment methods for quality objectives will be used with this additional caveat in mind, of course. Have quality objectives been analyzed to assign the resources, to identify responsible parties, to establish a timeline, and to determine evaluation practices? Again, the existing methods for assessment of quality objectives will be used, but with these new additional applicable requirements. I know from past experience that most of the companies that we audit, probably almost all of the companies that we audit, have these things accounted for already. Looking at Section 7, I believe this is the only additional requirement represented by Section 7. Has the organization determined a process to assess existing competencies against changing needs and trends? Now, ongoing competency has been a part of the standard for some time. Our view is that it was not as stringently enforced as was desired. If you look at Section 6.2 of the standard, it talks about methods for evaluation and reevaluation being established, and the effectiveness of training activities. They want to really drive home the idea that you need to be looking at competency on an ongoing basis, and you need to look at it against the what you need now and what you need in the future. Obviously, this is also very much an aspect of risk management by this. Are we ready for what's coming down the road? Now, in terms of how will we audit this, really we don't have to reinvent the wheel on this. The existing methods for review of competency will be brought to bear. I would project, again, that management review is a probable method. Perhaps preventive action would come to bear on this, but we will keep an open mind. Turning our attention then to Section 8, we've got a couple here that pertain specifically to design. So if you happen to be responsible for design, there are two new requirements that you need to be wary of. First, do design inputs include standards and/or codes of practice that the organization has committed to implement? Now, in terms of looking at this requirement against what has been required before, remember that ISO 9001-2008 included statutory and regulatory inputs. That was mandatory. We feel that this is an expansion of that idea, a clarification of that idea. It's not really such a new item. Now, in terms of how will we audit this, obviously the existing methods that we use for reviewing design activities, such as completed project review, those will be brought to bear in our new assessments here. And then additionally, do design inputs include consideration of potential consequences of failure due to the nature of products or services? Now this one's a little bit new. And you know, and you can draw some preliminary conclusions on what they're going for here. You know, if we're talking about safety, financial fallout, and so forth. Now, one of the things that we also feel strongly about is that this is going to be very dependent on exactly what it is that you're designing. And you know, if you are designing an end user product, obviously that's one thing. If what you're designing is part of a much larger assembly and you don't have final design approval on the end user product, well, your ability to consider potential consequences of failure is going to be somewhat limited. So we're projecting that this clause obviously is going to apply in some cases, and it will have limited applicability in others, and we'll obviously take that on a case-by-case basis. Section 8, another requirement here, has the organization established a method to communicate its intentions in control and monitoring of external provider performance to the external providers? Now, the standard has long required a reevaluation of suppliers as well. Section 741 talks about methods of evaluation and reevaluation. But in terms of those methods being actually communicated to the external providers themselves, the standard didn't really force your hand on that as it is doing now. However, the existing methods of communication, purchase orders, contracts, and so forth, will more than likely be appropriate and applicable for meeting this requirement. Have controls been established for external provider property where ownership does not transfer to the organization? Now, this is an interesting new requirement. We've already for many years had requirements in place that pertained to customer property. We now have similar requirements for external provider property. You know, we brainstormed on this, and one example that we came up with was, you know, if you had a paint supplier that you were working with, and you had a paint booth installed by that paint supplier, where it was technically their paint booth. It was on loan for you to use their paint supplies on your products. If you had damaged that item or in some other way compromised that item, there needs to be a process to communicate that back to the external provider. Now again, existing methods of discourse and agreement between organizations and their external providers, those things will address this. It's just now it is more specifically subject to audit than it was previously. Also, obviously, it is likely that this will be of limited applicability in most cases. Have controls for the expanded list of applicable post-delivery activities been established? Now again, this is only going to pertain if you have some of these post-delivery activities, things like warranty and so forth. You know, we're going to be looking to your contractual process, your planning process, your service process, and so forth. But they've expanded what post-delivery activity means, and therefore we need to assess it. Has the organization determined a process for responding to unplanned changes in such a way that conformity with requirements is maintained? Now, when we have an unplanned change, that typically means there's been a problem. And accordingly, it's our projection that in a lot of cases, unplanned changes are going to fall under the corrective action banner. So that's how we are going to approach this. You know, when something unexpected happens that represents a change, is there a process for capturing that and for recording the assessments? And that actually continues on the next slide here. Have you determined a method for retaining documented information about those changes, including who authorized the change and actions arising? So again, it's projected that the customer complaint and or corrective action process will very likely be the methodologies used to address this requirement. Obviously, if there is something different that's proposed, we will consider that as well. Turning then to Section 9, the last of these new requirements, most of which pertain to management review. There are some new discussion points that are required. We're going to kind of go through these rapid fire here. Has the management review process been structured that it includes discussion of internal and external issues, including the effect therein on the strategic direction of the company? Has management review been structured that it includes discussion of external provider or supplier performance? And has it been structured in such a way that it includes an assessment of risk management? Now obviously, in terms of how will we audit this, we will audit management review as we always have through a review of your management review minutes. These new topics, I think to a point, some of these are not new. Supplier performance was always something that was implied. Changes was definitely something that was mentioned in a way in the old standard. Risk management, yes, this is new, but again, in past webinars we've tied the parallels between risk management and many of the existing activities that you were doing and are doing under ISO 9001-2008. So taken together, I don't think this is a huge amount of new material, but obviously there are some aspects of this that are going to be unique. Now, turning our attention then to looking at how is this audit going to be different, and you know, we've tried to kind of summarize the key aspects of how the audit will be different, emphasizing throughout. In practice, the difference in the audit is going to be minimal and manageable. So the new ideas here, risk-based thinking, the elimination of previously required documentation, the whole concept of interested parties, and the expanded role of leadership, or perhaps more appropriately, the additional attention now being paid to the role of leadership. And to that, we are going to be an ISO 9001:2015 audit. It's going to include a more extensive discussion with the leadership team. We've examined this now in several places, how leadership's role in the system has been emphasized in the new standard. They've placed additional emphasis on it. So PJR has had to expand the portions of the audit that deal directly with leadership. Our new audit report now includes some targeted questions that the auditors have to ask the audit team, the management team. And we expect that that part of the audit is going to take not a lot of time, but it is going to take some time. The auditor has to sit down with the leadership team and go down this list of questions and verify that leadership is involved in the dealings of the quality management system. I'll also mention our audit report also now specifically directs auditors to ensure that leadership is involved. Are they participants in management review, participants in corrective action, and so forth? What evidence do you see that leadership is involved? The audit does include a targeted review of risk management. Now, we've said this many times over, a formal process for risk management is not required, but the auditor is directed to ask about risk management and has to be prepared to examine the various activities that are presented by the auditee. It is presumed that, as we've mentioned, there's a lot of things you're doing under ISO 9001:2008 that can constitute a fulfillment of this requirement. Preventive action, competency planning, review of requirements. We are asking our auditors to bring up the topic, to ask about risk management, and be prepared to examine what is presented and to keep an open mind on what is presented. There are no more preconceived expectations on documentation. Again, this is another item that we've discussed many times over, but there are no specific requirements for procedures, no specific requirements for a quality manual. Now, for you, this means that if an auditor demands a procedure for a particular activity and you don't have it, it's okay. The standard says it's okay. However, it also means that if you choose to have a procedure to lend some control or in pursuit of consistency within your audit process, the content of that procedure is still considered relevant audit criteria. Audit criteria is a very broadly defined term, and it includes not just the ISO 9001:2015 standard, but any self-imposed requirements, including quality manuals, procedures, work instructions, etc. Now, in addition to what's being ushered in by ISO 9001:2015, there is a new version of ISO 17021. Now, this is a standard that Perry Johnson Registrars has to abide by. Those of you that are currently certified, you'll note on your certificates you might have an ANAB logo, you might have a UCAS logo. When they come to visit PJR, we have to uphold the requirements of ISO 17021. And one of the things that 17021 is requiring us to do is assess statutory and regulatory requirements. And accordingly, we've added a special section to the audit report to record the results of those reviews. Now, it's conceivable that you may have no applicable statutory and regulatory requirements, but we are directing our auditors to ask and to dig in, looking at contracts, looking at customer purchase orders, things of this nature to ascertain, are there applicable statutory and regulatory requirements? And if so, are they being upheld? Now, in terms of how will the audit be the same, the most important thing that I want to emphasize is that we are still auditing your processes. The system is still very much yours to define, still very much yours to shape in terms of what are my processes and how do I control them. We don't set out to audit the elements of the standard per se. Element-based auditing has been obsolete for 15 years, and we want to be sure that we are auditing your processes. And the auditing methods are going to be the same. We're still going to be observing activities. We're still going to be reviewing documented information. We're still going to be interviewing people. All of the things that we do to learn about a process, to sample evidence about the process, those things are unchanged. We still expect you to demonstrate that the requirements of the standard have been addressed, that your processes are effective, and so forth. So the mechanics of the audit are completely unchanged as a result of the new standard. We are ready to help you have a smooth transition as to ISO 9001:2015. And we're very confident that for the vast majority of our clients, this transition is going to proceed with minimal difference from past assessments, and that the new standard itself has a host of benefits that you're going to enjoy. We do want to encourage you to keep in touch with us. We do have an opt-in feature on our website. If you visit www.pjr.com, at the very bottom of the page you can enter your email address and click subscribe. You'll be kept informed about the latest updates on ISO 9001 as well as upcoming webinars on a whole host of topics. So definitely keep in touch and allow us to keep in touch with you. I want to thank everyone for their time today and attention to my presentation. At this time, I'm going to turn my attention to the questions dashboard here, and we'll start going through your questions here. Okay, William Fingston asks, what types of companies will see no additional audit time in certifying to the new standard? It is generally, William, going to be based on the size of the organization. The larger companies already have an additional amount of audit time that's been added, but again, it's going to be taken on a case-by-case basis. Okay. We're getting several questions on slides. Excuse me, slides that pertain, questions rather, on can we get copies of the presentation. We will definitely make the presentation available to you at the conclusion here for download and for reviewing. Okay. Okay, Charles Scalise asked, will the auditor be permitted to challenge why a specific or particular party was determined to be non-applicable? Charles, I would say that that's certainly probable and possible. We have a senior auditor executive committee here at PJR, and when there is a disagreement, excuse me, or disconnect between the auditor and auditee, that's where the committee would step in, and that extends not just to questions of interested party, but to any other aspect of the audit process. Okay. Samantha Berg asks, one of your slides mentioned that in the past auditing was considered off limits. Does this mean you will be able to audit it at all? Yes, to the extent that we now have to confirm that the strategic path and quality path is on a shared footing, and also that applicable quality system requirements have been deployed within business processes. Okay. William Fingston asked, does post-delivery activities include document retention? William, I'm digging through the standard right now as it pertains to post-delivery activities. And I'm going to refer to section 855. And in general, what the standard says is that you need to meet requirements for post-delivery activities and determine the extent of what that's going to mean. It does not specifically come out and say document retention, material C of A's and things of this nature. So it's going to be based on, I would say, the expectations of your customers and what you agree to as an organization. Okay, Samantha Berg is asking about internal auditor training. We are working on that through the Perry Johnson companies. That is something that will be offered in the near future. Peter Math, I think I'm pronouncing it right, says, do you have a general recommendation for an organization seeking certification ISO 9001 for the first time? Peter, I do absolutely have a recommendation. First and foremost, get a copy of the 9001 2015 standard, and then I would familiarize yourself with the IAF mandatory document number 9, which talks about preparing for certification. Those are two good preliminary steps that you can take. Okay, Samantha Berg asks, can you expand on statutory and regulatory requirements? What is subject to audit? Well, Samantha, statutory and regulatory is an extremely broad topic, and it's a difficult item to nail down in just a few minutes. But in general, what we've understood in the past about statutory and regulatory is that if it is a requirement imposed by the industry, if it's a requirement imposed by a governmental agency, if it's a requirement that's imposed by a regulator, those requirements can then come to bear in the audit practice, in the design of products. I'll give you one example that I've encountered in the past. If you work within the realm of defense, if you sell to the Army, if you sell to the Department of Defense, there are applicable requirements that pertain to where you get your raw materials. And there are requirements that mandate that you must use domestic sources for your raw materials. That's an example of a requirement that would be specified in a contract and by the customer, and the auditors would then be expected to follow up on that and verify that that's being upheld. Now, this is already very common in aerospace auditing, and it's always been applicable in ISO 9001 auditing, but it's very rarely been enforced. Hank Surface asks, if our leadership only consists of 2 people, will the extensive questioning of management be addressed to only those 2 or all of executive management? Hank, I would say that in terms of who you define as the leadership team, we are going to take that on a case-by-case basis. You have to be prepared to demonstrate that the leadership team is sufficiently broad and sufficiently enabled to manage the entirety of the quality management system. Now, if that means that that's the 2 people at the very top of the company, then that's what it means. If it means that it's the upper 2 rungs of the org chart, well, then that's what that means. We will take that on a case-by-case basis. Terry Brandt asks, is there a side-by-side comparison available? Yes, there is. If you go to our website, www.pjr.com, it's right on the home page, and it's labeled side-by-side comparison. It's right near the top of the web page. Okay. Karen Smokonich, I believe, asks, will statutory requirements include OSHA requirements being audited? Karen, I would call that possible, but unlikely. Again, OSHA requirements are statutory, but they're also, for the most part, rooted in safety. Now, one possible thing that we might see from that is product packaging, product handling practices. Those are certainly things that we observe as auditors and where an OSHA requirement might be applicable. Okay, Donna Hirschbiel asks, how soon are we expected to make the transition? The official cutoff for the transition to the new standard is going to be in May of 2018. That's the last date that we'll be offering ISO 9001-2008 audits. Now, in terms of a new certification, that's going to be March of 2017. That's the last time we're going to be offering new certification to 9001-2008. Okay. Karen Hampton asks, is the new standard available or required for the transition process? Karen, the standard is available for purchase from ISO.org. Is it mandatory that you have a copy of it? No, but it would be questionable if you didn't have a copy of it. Luis Ortiz asks, is the 19,011-2011 standard changing? No, it is not. At the present time, the ISO 19,011 standard is going to remain as is. Amy Sutrin asks, is formal internal auditor training a requirement, or can an existing internal auditor conduct training for a new internal auditor? Amy, I will advise you that in terms of internal auditing, remember that it is a competency, and therefore it is subject to the organization's determination of what it means to be competent. So the organization has to set its own agenda on how they are going to get the internal auditors competent. So do they have to do formal training? No, but they do have to be prepared to demonstrate that the internal audits are effective. Okay, Samantha Berg asks, if the internal auditor is from accounting and you audit accounting, does this mean the internal audit from accounting can no longer perform internal audits? Samantha, it would mean that that person cannot audit their own work. It does not mean that they can't audit other aspects of the quality system. Okay. Okay, Ricardo Mendoza asks, are subsidiary organizations to be audited on the same basis as a corporate headquarters? Some information is kept at the corporate level. Ricardo, I don't think that the new standard is necessarily challenging any need-to-know type arrangements. It's essentially, you know, if the corporate headquarters is responsible for strategic direction, that's not something then that we would expect or demand would be as well known or as well informed at the subsidiary level. Bruce Dennis asks, one of the slides mentioned documentation no longer needing it for audit purposes. Can you go into more detail on this? I certainly can. The 9001-2015 standard has eliminated all requirements for procedures as well as the quality manual. Now, the new term documented information has been introduced, and actually if you've already got a copy of the standard, I would encourage you to review the annex from the standard that discusses the difference between maintained documented information and retained documented information. This is actually something that we cover in more in depth in our other webinar. Maintained documented information, that phrase can be thought of as kind of a replacement for documents and procedures. And there's a handful of things that you're required to maintain. You're required to have a maintained statement of what your scope is. You're required to have a maintained statement of what are the non-applicable clauses and so forth. Now the other phrase, retained documented information, this refers to records, and obviously there's several more required records, things like management review, internal audit, competency, and so forth. Now, in terms of what does this mean for the audit and for audit purposes, an organization has to demonstrate that its processes are consistent and effective and controlled. Now, a procedure is one way to do that. And in the past, when the subject was, for example, non-conforming product, you had to have a procedure for that. You had to have a procedure that specified how you control the non-conforming product. You don't have to have a procedure for that activity anymore, but you still have to show that that activity is consistent and effective. So if you have no procedure, we have to audit whatever controls you've put in place. If you happen to have a procedure, the procedure is still subject to audit. So I hope that's some clarification for you. Ricky Cox asks us, do you have to provide proof of training for internal auditors? Yes, Ricky, only on the basis that, again, internal auditing is considered a competency, no different than any other competency within the company, whether it's running a machine or taking orders or what have you. And records of competency assessment are required, including for internal audits. Rachel Oliver asks, now with the 2015, will an internal auditor be able to audit the entire system since they are not an owner of specific sections to where currently an auditor could not audit their own activities? Rachel, the internal audit requirement is still very much stating that internal auditors cannot audit their own work. The verbiage that's actually used is the organization shall select auditors and conduct audits to ensure objectivity and impartiality of the audit process. And that is absolutely taken to mean that you cannot audit your own work. Brian Vandela asks, will the ISO 9004 document be updated? Brian, at the present time, we have been told that the 9004 document will remain at its current 2009 revision. Now, whether they're planning to update it later remains unknown at the present time. Heidi Jones asks, are we expected to make a list of interested parties by name and review it periodically? How else can we demonstrate that we have determined which IPs are relevant? Interesting question. The actual requirement states that you need to monitor and review information about your interested parties and their relevant requirements. It doesn't specifically come out and say that you have to have a list. So a couple ideas for you, Heidi. You may, for example, your customers are obviously going to be interested parties. You've no doubt already got a process in place for interfacing with them, taking orders, taking contracts, things of this nature. Your suppliers, they too would potentially be considered interested parties, and you've got a process in place for interacting with them. It does not have to be a centralized list. It does not have to be anything that's captured within a quality manual. Those are all potential approaches, but they're not mandatory. Okay. JT Craddock asks, is it possible that there will be additional revisions to the current 9001 2015 spec before May of 2018? JT, I suppose it is possible, but I would put it on a scale of 1 in a million that would happen. There is such a careful and drawn-out process for issuing the standard. You've got to remember that there are an unbelievable number of people that weigh in on the writing of the standard. It's been voted on now, I think a total of 4 times, from committee draft to final draft. They've ironed out all of the wrinkles on this document. I'd say the chances of it being revised by May of 2018 are extremely remote. I can't say that it won't happen, but it's an extremely remote possibility. Heidi Jones asks, is sales and marketing subject to audit? What if they are not physically located at the site to be audited? Heidi, we have in the past had situations where personnel are not immediately available, and we've done in the past teleconference auditing, we've done database auditing. There are ways to approach it, and I would say that if sales and marketing is one of your processes that makes up your quality system, it's something that could be audited, something that could be looked at to fulfill the standard. Jay Lawrence asks, is it acceptable to have just one main internal auditor and one other person to audit the main auditor? Yes, so long as neither party is auditing their own work, that would be considered acceptable. Daniel Carnwitua, I believe I'm pronouncing that right. What would be the acceptance basis for selecting an interested party? Well, relevancy is up to the organization. Now, that's not to say that we can't challenge your logic, but it is, according to the standard, up to the organization. I would say whatever measure you use to analyze and say these are the relevant interested parties, so long as you can explain that to the auditor and make your case, that should be acceptable. Casey Viach, I believe I'm pronouncing that right, or Viach. If we have other regulators auditing our statutory and regulatory requirements, will PJR take those audit reviews' conclusions as evidence of meeting those requirements? I would say potentially yes. That's an interesting idea. Certainly, it would direct us to what the applicable statutory and regulatory requirements are in the first place. Catherine Freeland asks, we use an outside consultant to do our audits. Is it still applicable, permissible under the 2015 standard? Yes, absolutely. You can definitely continue to outsource your internal audits so long as the audit is performed in accordance with any self-imposed requirements that you have. Carla Jones, hello there, asks, the standard doesn't require procedures. However, customer-specific, such as the Ford MSA, each OEM MMOG, do require procedures. Will auditors require customer specifics if there is no procedure required for 9000 or for ISO 2015? Would this be an NCR? Carla, if a customer establishes something as a requirement and it is something that you've agreed to implicitly, it is something that can be enforced during the ISO 9001 2015 audit. So if you have a customer telling you that you have to have a procedure, for example, for non-conforming product control or for analyzing your measurement devices, that is something that could potentially be enforced during the 9001 2015 audit as an expectation established by an interested party. Okay, I'll kind of sit tight for just a minute here to see if we have any additional questions. Okay, I'd like to thank everybody for your attention today. I do hope you have found this presentation to be beneficial. Have a good day.